The chamber was massive, built to hold representatives from dozens of worlds. Crystal pillars rose from the floor, each one glowing with the soft light of a different star system. The air hummed with translation devices working overtime as 12 different species argued with one another. At the center of it all sat Chancellor Thexfell, his 4 eyes scanning the assembly with satisfaction. Deho sat alone at the human delegation table. He wore a simple black suit, his hands folded calmly on the smooth surface before him. Around him, aliens in elaborate robes and ceremonial armor gestured wildly, their voices rising in pitch and volume. But Deho remained still, his expression neutral as he listened to them decide humanity's fate. "The humans have gone too far," Thexfell announced, his voice amplified across the chamber. "They establish colonies and territories they have no claim to. They build military installations without council approval. They act as though they own the galaxy." A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembled delegates. Deho noticed how many of them avoided looking in his direction. Species that had requested human help just months ago now nodded along with the accusations. "We have records of 43 human settlements in the outer reach," continued a delegate from the Vryn Collective. Her scales shimmered as she spoke. "These are disputed territories. The humans knew this when they arrived." Deho could have pointed out that 37 of those settlements were established at the direct request of local populations facing pirate raids. He could have mentioned that the human military installations were defensive networks protecting vulnerable worlds. But he had already said these things in private meetings, and no one had listened then either. "Ambassador Deho," Thexfell said, turning his attention to the human, "does your government have anything to say in its defense?" Deho stood slowly. The chamber fell silent. He took a moment to look around the room, meeting the eyes of delegates he had worked with for years. Some looked ashamed. Others seemed eager to see him humbled. "We have broken no laws," Deho said simply. "Every human presence in disputed space serves a protective or humanitarian function. We have documentation for all of it." "Documentation you prepared yourself," Thexfell interrupted. "The council has voted. We find your explanations insufficient." Deho nodded slowly. "I see, then. What does the council require?" Thexfell leaned forward, clearly enjoying this moment. "Humanity will cease all expansion beyond your recognized borders immediately. All settlements in disputed territories will be dismantled within 30 standard cycles. All military installations will be deactivated and removed. Furthermore, humanity will accept a 20% tariff on all trade with council species and submit to regular inspections of your remaining territories." The terms were designed to be humiliating. Deho knew this. The entire council knew this. This was not about security or fairness. This was about putting the ambitious humans in their place. "And if we refuse," Deho asked quietly, "then the council will have no choice but to enforce compliance through military action," Thexfell replied. "We represent 47 species and control most of the known galaxy. I trust you understand what that means." Deho was silent for a long moment. In the gallery above, he could see Jiwan, minister from Marith 4. She had worked closely with human engineers on her world's defense systems. She looked upset, her hands gripping the railing. She had tried to speak against this ultimatum, but her voice had been drowned out. "I would like to address the council," Deho said. "Not as a defense, but as a warning." Thexfell made a dismissive gesture. "Speak, if you must." Deho took a breath. "For 80 years, humanity has been part of this galactic community. In that time, we have contributed more than you realize. Our medical teams respond to plague outbreaks across the galaxy. Our peacekeepers maintain buffer zones in disputed territories. Our engineers maintain defensive networks around worlds that cannot protect themselves. Our diplomats prevent small disputes from becoming wars. We are aware of your services," Thexfell said, "and we appreciate them. But that does not give you the right to expand unchecked." "I am not asking for that right," Deho replied. "I am simply asking you to consider what you are demanding. If humanity withdraws from all disputed space, who will maintain the systems we have built? Who will respond to the crises we currently handle? We will manage our own affairs, Dexwell said firmly. As we did before humanity arrived, Deho looked around the chamber again. He saw pride on their faces. They truly believed they did not need humanity. They believed human contributions were minor, easily replaced. I have worked with many of you personally, Deho said, his voice carrying across the silent chamber. I have seen your worlds and met your people. I know you are capable of great things. But I also know what challenges you face, because we help you face them every single day. I am asking you to reconsider this ultimatum. Not for humanity's sake, but for your own. Dixval stood, his tall frame dominating the chamber. This council has made its decision. You have 30 cycles to comply. This session is adjourned. Deho bowed respectfully, as was proper. He gathered his few belongings and walked toward the exit. As he passed through the chamber doors, he heard the delegates already celebrating behind him. They thought they had one. Back in his quarters, Deho composed a message to Earth. It was brief and to the point. He outlined the Council's demands and his recommendation. Within hours, the response came back. It was even shorter than his message. The next morning, Deho returned to the Council chamber. Dexval looked smug as the human ambassador approached the central podium. Does humanity accept the Council's terms? The Chancellor asked. We acknowledge them, Deho replied. Withdrawal begins immediately. The chamber erupted in self-congratulatory noise. Delegates congratulated each other on their firm stance. Dexval smiled, his 4 eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Deho left the chamber for the last time. Behind him, the council celebrated what they believed was a great diplomatic victory. They had finally taught the humans their place in the galactic order. None of them noticed the sadness in Deho's eyes as he departed. None of them understood what they had just done. The evacuation happened faster than anyone expected. Within 5 days, every human colony in disputed space went silent. Transport ships arrived in waves, loading equipment and personnel with mechanical efficiency. By the 10th day, the settlements were empty. By the 15th, even the temporary structures were gone, leaving only bare ground where thriving communities had existed. Juan stood on the observation deck of Marith 4's orbital station and watched the last human transport ship depart. She had tried to speak with Commander Hanbin before he left, to explain that she had voted against the ultimatum, that she had argued for a compromise. But Hanbin had simply smiled sadly and told her it was not her fault. We have our orders, he had said. We're going home. Now the orbital defense grid that his team had maintained for 6 years sat dark and unmanned. Guan had technical staff, of course. They knew how to operate the basic functions. But the complex maintenance, the constant updates, the small fixes that kept everything running smoothly, all of that had been done by human technicians. She had not realized how much they did until they stopped doing it. Minister, we have a problem with Sector 7, her assistant reported. The targeting sensors are showing error codes. Have engineering look at it, Juan replied. They already did. They say they need the human maintenance protocols. But when they tried to access the database, they found it was locked behind human authorization codes. Juan closed her eyes. Of course it was. The humans had built these systems. They owned the underlying technology. And now they were gone. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. On Kelver Station, a major medical hub, the biosynthesizers began failing one by one. These machines produced synthetic organs for transplant surgeries, a technology humans had shared freely with the Council species. But the machines were complex, requiring constant calibration and maintenance. Dr. Taiyang tried everything. He had manuals and training materials, but they assumed a level of technical knowledge his staff simply did not have. The humans who had worked alongside him had made it look easy, fixing problems almost before they became serious. Now each small malfunction cascaded into larger failures. How many patients are waiting for transplants? Taiyang asked his nurse. 43 on the critical list, she replied. 260 overall. Tell them we are doing everything we can, Taiyang said. But they both knew it was not enough. People would die waiting for organs that could no longer be produced. The trade routes suffered next. Human merchant ships had always been a minority in galactic commerce, but they served a crucial role. They took the dangerous routes, the unprofitable ones that connected remote systems, to the larger economy. They also provided armed escorts through pirate-heavy regions. It's not for profit, but as a public service. Now those routes went unserviced. Pirates, who had been kept in check by human patrol ships, grew bolder. Attacks increased fivefold in the first month. Small merchant vessels from other species, lacking the weapons or training to defend themselves, simply stopped traveling through dangerous space. Hundreds of remote colonies found themselves cut off from supply lines. The Council promised to provide alternative security, but they lacked the ships and trained personnel. Their military forces were designed for large-scale conflicts, not the constant patrol work that humans had done so quietly. Chancellor Vexfell called an emergency session after the first month. The chamber was tense, very different from the celebratory. The atmosphere of 30 days ago, the humans are deliberately sabotaging our systems, accused a delegate. From the Salix Union, they locked us out of technology we paid for. Did we pay for it? Asked another delegate. I reviewed our contracts with the human medical teams. They provided services for free, asking only for permission to establish small support stations. That is irrelevant, Vexfell declared. The humans have an obligation to fulfill their existing commitments. I propose we send a formal demand that they unlock their systems and complete their contracts. The vote passed unanimously. The message was sent to Earth through official channels. The response came back within hours. All human personnel have been recalled per Council directive. We are in full compliance with Council demands. All contracts terminated as requested. As requested. Vexfell read the message again. We never requested contract termination. But legally they had. The ultimatum had demanded human withdrawal from all disputed spaces and reduced interaction with Council species. The humans were simply following those orders to the letter. Juan tried to contact her human colleagues directly. She sent messages to Hanben, to the engineers she had worked with, to anyone who might listen. All she received were automated responses. Diplomatic channels suspended per Council directive. For emergency assistance, please contact the Galactic Council. She wanted to scream at the irony. The Council had caused this problem. The Council could not fix it. By the third month, the first real crisis hit. The Vren Collective and the Salix Union, ancient rivals, had maintained an uneasy peace for over a century. That peace had been maintained by human mediators who staffed the buffer zone between their territories. With the humans gone, small incidents escalated quickly. A Vren patrol ship crossed into disputed space. A Salix defense station fired warning shots. The Vren ship fired back. Within a week, both sides had mobilized military forces. Within 2 weeks, they were at war. The Council tried to intervene, sending peacekeepers from other species. But these forces lacked the training and authority that human peacekeepers had possessed. Neither the Vren nor the Salix respected them. The fighting intensified. Thousands died in the first month of combat. Tens of thousands became refugees. The Council watched helplessly as a conflict they could have prevented spiraled out of control. Then the plague hit the Drantini Federation. It was a common virus, one that appeared every few years. Usually it was contained quickly. The Drantini had protocols for this. But those protocols had always included immediate contact with human medical teams, who would arrive with vaccines and treatment within days. This time, no one came. The Drantini scientists worked frantically to develop their own vaccine, but the process was slow. The virus spread faster than they could contain it. Millions fell ill. Hospitals overflowed. The death toll climbed higher each day. Chancellor Vexfell himself contracted the virus. As he lay in his medical bed, breathing with difficulty, he finally understood what his pride had cost. The humans had not been expanding aggressively. They had been responding to needs, filling gaps, quietly preventing disasters, and now they were gone. Not through force or threat, but simply through absence. They had retreated to their own space and closed their borders. They were not hostile. They simply refused all contact. The galaxy was learning a painful lesson. The humans had been more important than anyone realized. And now, in the deafening silence of their withdrawal, everyone could hear the sound of systems breaking down. Commander Hayasu had always been good with numbers. As a logistics officer in the Drantini military, she spent her days managing supply chains and resource allocation. It was boring work, but she was good at it. Recently, though, the numbers had stopped making sense. Before the human withdrawal, her department had required minimal oversight. Supplies arrived on time, defensive systems operated smoothly, and crises were managed efficiently. Now everything was falling apart, and she could not understand why. The Drantini were competent. They had managed their own affairs for thousands of years before humans arrived. So why were they suddenly failing at basic tasks? Hayasu decided to investigate. She requested access to historical military records, focusing on the period after humanity joined the galactic community. What she found made her blood run cold. The files were detailed. Time-stamped records of every military operation, every diplomatic intervention, every crisis response over the past 80 years, and in nearly every single one, there was a small notation she had never paid attention to before: human support provided. She began to compile the data. In the past 80 years, there had been 360 major conflicts between council species. Human mediators had resolved or prevented 297 of them. The remaining 63 had resulted in millions of deaths. There had been 43 major plague outbreaks. Human medical teams had responded to 41 of them, containing the viruses before they could become pandemics. The 2 outbreaks humans had not handled had killed over 50 million beings combined. Asteroid impacts, reactor failures, environmental disasters, the list went on and on. For 8 decades, humanity had been quietly preventing catastrophes across the galaxy. They had done it so efficiently, so invisibly, most species never even knew there had been a problem. Hayasu pulled up the current situation report. 6 months after the human withdrawal, 17 major conflicts were active. 15 species faced extinction-level threats. The galactic economy had contracted by 37%. Death tolls were climbing exponentially. She compiled everything into a report and requested an emergency meeting with the council. 3 days later, she stood before the assembled delegates, her hands shaking as she presented her findings. "We were not managing our own affairs," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "The humans were managing them for us. They had built a support structure so comprehensive, so effective, that we never even noticed it was there." The chamber was silent. Delegates stared at the data she had projected on the main display. The numbers were undeniable. "This must be exaggerated," said a delegate from the Kelver Consortium. "We have our own crisis response teams." "Yes," Hayasu agreed. "And they handle approximately 15% of the incidents that occur. The humans handled the other 85%. They did it quietly, without fanfare, often without even informing us there had been a problem." She pulled up another chart. "Here's a breakdown of the defensive networks protecting council worlds. 63% of them were designed, built, or maintained by humans. They are now failing at a rate of 3% per week. Within 6 months, most of them will be non-functional." "Why did they not tell us?" demanded another delegate. "If they were doing so much, why keep it secret?" Hayasu had found the answer to that question too. She displayed a series of reports, proposals, and requests that human ambassadors had submitted over the years. Requests for additional support, for official recognition of their peacekeeping role, for a greater voice in council decisions. All of them had been denied or ignored. The council had accepted human help while simultaneously diminishing their political importance. They had treated humanity's contributions as either unimportant or as obligations humanity owed to the galaxy. "They tried to tell us," Hayasu said quietly. "We chose not to listen." Chancellor Vexfell, still recovering from the plague that had killed 30 million of his people, finally spoke. His voice was weak, but his words carried across the chamber. "What do you recommend, Commander?" "Contact Earth immediately," Hayasu replied. "Admit our mistake. Apologize. Beg them to return if necessary. because if this continues, we are looking at complete galactic collapse within 2 years. The debate that followed was heated. Pride fought against pragmatism. Some delegates argued that admitting fault would make the council look weak. Others insisted that appearing weak was better than actually collapsing. While the council argued, the crises continued to mount. The war between the Vren and Salix had expanded, drawing in neighboring species. 3 more plagues had broken out, with no human medical teams to contain them. Economic collapse was triggering civil unrest on dozens of worlds. G1 watched from the gallery, feeling helpless. Her own world, Mareth 4, was barely holding together. The defense grid had failed completely 2 weeks ago. Pirate raids were increasing. Her government was considering evacuation of the orbital stations because they could no longer protect them. She had tried to contact Hanbin again, tried to explain that not everyone had supported the ultimatum, but the silence from human space remained absolute. They were not angry. They were not threatening. They simply were not there anymore. A thought occurred to her. The humans had not just withdrawn their people and their technology. They had withdrawn their care. For 80 years, they had cared about the galaxy's well-being, had invested time and resources into helping others. The Council had taken that care for granted, had treated it as an obligation rather than a gift. Now that gift was gone, and the galaxy was learning its true value in the Council chamber. Dexvel made his decision. Despite his earlier pride, despite the political cost, he knew what had to be done. "We will send a delegation to Earth," he announced. "We will apologize for our actions and request renewed cooperation." The vote was close, but it passed. The question then became, who would lead the delegation? Who would stand before the humans and admit that the Council had been catastrophically wrong? Juan volunteered. She had worked with humans. She had opposed the ultimatum, and she was willing to face rejection if it meant even a small chance of fixing this disaster. "Very well," Vexful said. "Minister Juan will lead the delegation. But understand the humans may refuse to even speak with us. We expelled them from the Council. We demanded they withdraw. We have no right to expect their help now." Guan bowed her acceptance. She knew the odds were against her. She knew the humans had every reason to turn them away. But she had to try. As she left the chamber to prepare for the journey, she passed by a window overlooking the station's damaged sections. Repairs had stalled due to lack of resources. In the distance, she could see the dark hulks of defensive satellites that no longer functioned. The galaxy was crumbling, and the only ones who could help were the ones they had driven away. Qiwan understood now what Deho had tried to warn them about. The humans had not been threatening the Council. They had been trying to save it from itself, and the Council in its arrogance had rejected that salvation. Now they would have to beg for a second chance. Knowing they might not deserve one, the delegation ship approached the Sol System's outer boundary with extreme caution. They had sent multiple requests for permission to enter human space, and each time received only automated responses instructing them to wait. After 3 days of waiting at the border, Yuan was beginning to think they would be turned away without ever speaking to anyone. Then, finally, a response came. Not automated this time, but a simple text message. "State your purpose." Giwan drafted and redrafted her reply a dozen times. How could she summarize 2 years of suffering in a few words? How could she convey the desperation of 37 worlds in conflict, of billions suffering from preventable disasters? In the end, she settled for honesty. "We were wrong. We need help, please." Another long silence. "Then, you may approach Earth. 1 ship only. No weapons." The journey to Earth took another week. During that time, Jion reviewed everything she knew about human culture, human history, human values. She needed to understand them if she had any hope of convincing them to return. What struck her most was how often humans had suffered through their own failures. Their history was filled with wars, plagues, and disasters. They had nearly destroyed themselves multiple times before finally learning to work together. That suffering had shaped them, had taught them the value of prevention and cooperation, and the Council had thrown that gift. Back in their faces, Earth appeared in the viewport. A blue and green world that looked surprisingly peaceful. Giwan had expected massive defensive stations, fleets of warships, some sign of military buildup. Instead, she saw orbital habitats and space docks. Busy with commercial traffic, but not threatening. The delegation was directed to land at a facility outside what had once been Seoul. As their ship touched down, Giwan saw the landing area was modest, nothing like the grand diplomatic facilities other species maintained. A single figure waited for them. As Giwan descended the ramp, she recognized him immediately. Daeho looked older than when she had last seen him 2 years ago. His hair had more gray in it, and there were lines around his eyes that had not been there before. Ambassador Daeho Juan said, bowing deeply in the human custom. "Thank you for agreeing to see us." "I am no longer an ambassador," Daeho replied quietly. "I resigned from diplomatic service. But I agreed to this meeting as a personal favor to some old colleagues." He led them not to a conference room, but to a garden. It was beautiful, with carefully tended plants and a small stream running through it. Giwan noticed memorial stones placed throughout the garden, each one bearing names. "This is a memorial," Daeho explained. "These were human peacekeepers, medical personnel, engineers, and diplomats who died serving the galactic community. There are 12,000 names here." Juan felt her chest tighten. She had not known. She had worked alongside humans for years and never known they had paid such a price. "We did not do it for recognition," Daeho continued. "We did it because it was right. Because we knew what happened when crises went unmanaged. We had lived through it ourselves." They sat on benches near the stream. Giwan's delegation remained standing, uncomfortable and uncertain. But Daeho seemed at ease here, at peace, in a way he had never been during council sessions. "I need to tell you something," Guan began. Something the previous council administration hid from everyone. She pulled out a datapad and showed him the archived communications. Messages Daeho had sent in the weeks before the ultimatum, warning the council exactly what would happen if humanity withdrew. Detailed predictions of which conflicts would erupt, which systems would fail, which species would suffer. He had been right about everything. Every single prediction had come true. "They suppressed these," Giwan said, her voice shaking. "Chancellor Thexfell and his allies kept these warnings from the rest of the council. We voted on the ultimatum without knowing you had tried to prevent all of this." Daeho read through the messages slowly. His expression did not change, but Jawan saw his hands tighten slightly on the datapad. "I suspected as much," he said finally. "But knowing it for certain is different." "I voted against the ultimatum," Jiwan said. "So did 17 other delegates. But we were outvoted. And even those of us who opposed it did not fully understand what we would lose." "What you would lose?" Daeho repeated softly. "That is the problem, is it not? You are here because of what you lost, not because of what you did." The words stung because they were true. Quan wanted to argue, to defend herself and the other delegates who had opposed the ultimatum, but she knew it would ring hollow. "You are right," she said instead. "We are here because we are suffering, because our worlds are falling apart and we do not know how to fix them. But I hope we are also here because we finally understand what we did wrong." Daeho stood and walked to one of the memorial stones. He placed his hand on it gently. "Her name was Sumi," he said. "She was a medical researcher. Died on Kelver Station during a plague outbreak 12 years ago. She had a vaccine ready, but the disease killed her before she could distribute it. Her team finished her work and saved 200,000 lives." He turned back to Giwan. "Do you know why I'm telling you this? Because humanity did not help the galaxy as a transaction. We did it because people like Sumi believed it was the right thing to do. She died believing that her work mattered, that she was building something important. It did matter," Jiwan said. "We see that now." "Now," Daeho agreed. "After 2 years of suffering, after millions of deaths, after your economies collapsed and your political systems fractured, you see it now." He was not angry. That was what made it so difficult. If he had been angry, Giwan could have apologized, could have sought forgiveness. But Daeho just seemed tired. "What do you want from us?" he asked. "Truly, not the official requests, not the diplomatic language. What do you actually want?" Giwan took a deep breath. We want humanity to come back. To help us fix what is broken? To teach us what we should have learned 80 years ago. You want us to care again? Deho said. That is what you are really asking for. You want us to invest in the galaxy's well-being the way we did before. To give freely of our knowledge, our resources, our lives? Yes, Guan admitted. Deho was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked the question that changed everything. Do you understand what you are asking? This is not about ships or technology. Those are easy. You are asking us to trust you again. To believe that if we return, if we help, you will not simply take it for granted once more. Can you give me any reason to believe that? Juan had prepared many responses for this meeting. She had rehearsed arguments, planned appeals, ready diplomatic phrases to convince the humans to return. But sitting in that memorial garden, faced with Deho's simple, devastating question, all of those preparations felt hollow. No, she said finally. I cannot give you that reason. Not yet. Deho looked surprised. He had clearly expected her to make promises, to offer guarantees. Instead, she met his eyes with complete honesty. The council is changing, she continued. Dexvel was removed from power. New elections were held across most member species. People are angry and scared, and they are demanding accountability. But real change takes time. I cannot promise you that the galaxy has learned its lesson, because I do not know if it has. She stood and walked to the memorial stone Deho had touched earlier. Sumi, a woman who had died helping strangers. What I can tell you is this. I worked alongside your engineers for 6 years on Marith 4. I ate meals with them. I learned about their families. I knew them as people, not just as useful humans. And when the ultimatum came, I fought against it because I knew it was wrong. Not because I feared the consequences, but because it was cruel to people I cared about. Guan turned back to face him. That is what we lost. Not just your services, but the relationships. The understanding between species. The idea that we are all part of something larger than ourselves. Some of us remember that. Some of us want to rebuild it. But I will not lie and say everyone does. Deho was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was softer. What are you asking for then? If you know you cannot promise real change. I am asking for the chance to try, Guan replied. I am asking you to tell me what humanity needs to even consider returning. Not as servants this time. Not as background support that everyone ignores. But as equals. Deho gestured for her to sit again. They talked for hours, discussing what a new relationship might look like. He was frank about humanity's requirements, and they were substantial. First, genuine political reform in the council. Humanity would need equal representation, not the token seat they had held before. Decisions that affected human interests would require human approval. The council could not simply outvote humanity whenever it was convenient. Second, recognition of human territorial rights. The colonies humanity had abandoned would be officially recognized as human territory. No other species would be permitted to claim them. This was non-negotiable. Third, compensation for the losses humanity had suffered. The memorial garden held 12,000 names. But there were thousands more humans who had sacrificed careers, relationships, and opportunities to serve the galaxy. Those debts needed to be acknowledged forth, and most important, time. Humanity would not rush back. They would engage slowly, carefully, rebuilding trust one step at a time. They would help species that genuinely asked for help and showed appreciation. But they would not return to being the galaxy's invisible support system. These terms will be difficult for the Council to accept, Juan said. Many species still have too much pride, and they can continue managing on their own, Deho replied. Humanity does not need the Council. We are self-sufficient. We have our own colonies, our own trade networks, our own security. We will be fine. The question is whether the Council will be. It was a stark statement of reality. The galaxy needed humanity more than humanity needed the galaxy. That was the truth the Council had to accept. G1 returned to the Council 3 weeks later. The debate over humanity's terms was fierce and bitter. Delegates who still clung to pride argued that accepting these conditions would make the council look weak. They insisted humanity was bluffing, that they would return eventually because it was their moral duty. But Jawan had the data on her side. In the 6 months since her delegation had visited Earth, the galactic situation had worsened significantly. 43 species now faced extinctional-level threats. The wars had expanded. The economy was in freefall. They were running out of time. "Look at these numbers," she said, projecting the latest reports across the chamber. "We have perhaps 1 year before complete collapse. Maybe less. Humanity has given us a path forward. We can accept it, or we can cling to our pride while billions die." The vote took 3 days. In the end, necessity overcame pride. The council agreed to humanity's terms. Not unanimously. There were still delegates who voted against it, but by a significant majority. The first human ships returned 8 months later. Not military vessels, but medical transports. They went to the world suffering the worst plague outbreaks. The human teams worked alongside local doctors, teaching them techniques and providing medicine. But they were careful to credit local efforts, to make it clear they were supporting rather than replacing. Slowly, carefully, humanity re-engaged with the galaxy. They sent engineers to help repair critical infrastructure. But only 2 species that formally requested assistance and acknowledged the help they were receiving. They established new peacekeeping forces, but this time with mixed crews that included personnel from other species, training them in proper conflict resolution. On Marith 4, Giwan watched as Hanbin returned to oversee the reconstruction of the orbital defense grid. But things were different now. His team included Drantini, Kelver, and Marith engineers working alongside the humans. They were learning, truly learning, not just how to operate the systems, but how to maintain and improve them. "It is good to see you again," Jiwan said when they met. "It is good to be back," Hanbin replied. "But I will not lie, it was hard to watch from Earth, knowing what was happening and being unable to help. Why did humanity not help sooner? Even just a little?" Hanbin smiled sadly. "Because small helps would have let the council avoid learning the real lesson. They would have taken just enough assistance to stabilize, then gone back to the old patterns. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let someone feel the full weight of their choices." 5 years after the ultimatum, the galaxy was beginning to stabilize. The reforms were working. Humanity had taken their seat as full equals in the council. Species that had once ignored human contributions now publicly acknowledged and celebrated them in the new council chamber. Built as a joint project between 12 species, including humanity, a plaque was installed at the entrance. It bore a simple message in every council language: "We are stronger together, but only when together means equal." Deho attended the dedication ceremony. He was still not an ambassador. He had kept his retirement, but he came as a private citizen to witness this moment. Giwan stood beside him as the plaque was unveiled. "Do you think it will last?" she asked. "This new understanding?" Deho considered the question carefully. "I think it will last longer than before. The galaxy paid a terrible price for this lesson. Millions died. Economies collapsed. That kind of pain leaves scars? People do not forget easily, but it could happen again." Perhaps Deho agreed. "Humanity will be vigilant. We will not allow ourselves to be taken for granted again. But we also will not abandon the galaxy at the first sign of trouble." We learned something too, in our isolation. We learned that we care about more than just ourselves, that our purpose is bigger than our own survival. As they walked through the new chamber, Giwan noticed something. Every workstation, every system, every piece of technology bore labels, identifying who had built it and who maintained it. It was a small thing, but it represented something important. Acknowledgement, recognition, respect. The humans had retreated quietly. In that silence, the galaxy had learned to listen. They had learned that strength was not just about military power or economic dominance. It was about the quiet work of caring for others, of preventing disasters before they happened, of building something larger than any single species. And they had learned that such work must be valued, or it would not endure. The galaxy would not forget again. The cost had been too high, and if they did forget, the memorial gardens on Earth would stand as a reminder of what humanity had given, and what the galaxy had nearly lost forever.